I have an invisible toy. Yes, it's actually what it says. This is the Turbo Invisible Phantom Ranger from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Lightning Collection. I wonder if there is a Phantom Ranger in the room right now. I remember as a kid watching Power Rangers Turbo. It's probably one of the later series of the Power Rangers that I actually watched, but the Phantom Ranger did leave an impression. In fact, the Phantom Ranger helped me get back into the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers collection to begin with. See, I have the base version of the Phantom Ranger, and I really like this figure. It's a really cool looking figure because he does retain that very signature look, but the details of paint that pop out really give it some, I guess, differentiation. It gives it some visual interest when you're looking at a character that's just mostly matte black. The way that the red details pop out amongst the sea of black and silver, as well as the weapon he has, his blaster that has touches of gold, silver, and his signature black look. As far as I understand, and I'm not really too deep into Power Rangers lore, we never actually know who the Phantom Ranger is. I'm guessing there's probably fan canon theories and all kinds of other theories that go along with who this Ranger actually is, but for the most part he was mysterious, he was cool, and he had a really awesome suit. But that was only part of the story. You see, he is a Phantom Ranger, so he could disappear. He could be invisible. And the cool thing is, the Lightning Collection created the invisible version. And here he is. No, I'm just kidding. Here he is. This is the invisible version of the Phantom Ranger. And if you've watched me for any length of time, you know that I really like translucent characters. And not only is this guy translucent, he is also opalescent. What is this Turbo Invisible Phantom Ranger all about? Well, he's about a lot of see-through plastic. So let's clear this up a little bit. This is not a true translucent, a true invisible Ranger. This is a smoky look to him. There is a touch of gray infused into the translucency. I think ultimately that was the right call because when you look at the joints, especially in the light, you can see that they still have an opaqueness to them, which is a good thing because if you know anything about translucent plastic, you know that it's more brittle. It is a more fickle material, so over time, the joints would possibly break. Having them be opaque, having them not be see-through, I feel is a good choice here. Then we have the moments of pearlescence. So right here on the armor, right here on this removable armor, if we were to pop off all of the different pieces here, this is kind of a hard character to look at, or at least see the details for. And when you compare the two of them, when you stand them right next to each other, you can see the difference. And if we're talking about just what character captures your eye more, this guy. The, I guess, non-invisible mode is a more visually striking character because there is those areas to break up some of the sculpt. But when you look at the invisible mode, there isn't that. Only very few specific spaces. So one, if you're looking very closely at the joints, and then the visor. That it is an opaque gray. It actually kind of matches my hoodie here a little bit. As well as the knee pads and elbow pads. Those are an opaque gray as well. It's like a smoky appearance. And I'm trying to really think back to the Power Rangers Turbo, and I don't think that the invisible version of the Phantom Ranger was completely invisible there either. I think there was like a distortion or some kind of ghostly outline when he was in his invisible mode. So that's just kind of the first brush at this guy. In terms of the articulation, he moves really well. The joints I don't have any troubles with. In fact, he does have decent articulation throughout, considering that there is some armor, sculpted details in the way of the bicep and things like that. The only trouble I have with this character, and I feel like it's not as pronounced as the non-translucent version, is the head. It just doesn't seem to have a lot of articulation, or at least movement, you know, kind of rocking around that ball joint. In fact, here, let me just grab this guy here. We can kind of see there is, yeah, like it is a tighter joint. I get more motion in looking up and down of the original Phantom Ranger than I do this one. Which maybe I don't. I don't know. It's so hard to tell. We don't get like the visual detail distinction with the paint. This is just, you have to look really closely at it and just see it as like an overall figure. I think they did attempt to do some visual distinction beyond some of the joints. Like again, I mentioned like some of the pearlescent, the opalescence of the armor on his forearms, on his thighs, things like that. But it doesn't do that much work to separate the visual pieces of the character. When you stand back and just kind of look at him, he blends in. And if we're thinking about the aesthetic goals of this figure, he's a slippery figure too. And if we're talking about just the aesthetic goals of this figure, I think then that works. You want something that blends into the background. You want something that just disappears. It just becomes a form. And when we look at him, I don't know if you notice this, but I put his weapon in his hand. And it's just stuff like that that you don't immediately notice. But when we start adding the blast effects, because he does come with some blast effects, that's when things start to kind of pop out a little bit. Here we go, we put his red blast effect on the weapon, and you can see this got bent. This was part of the windowless packaging era, so this was just in a little package of tissue paper, but it does pop out. You can now see some visual distinction of the character. And when you put on his chest blast effect, that he's taking a big giant blast of energy, or he's expelling energy. Again, I don't exactly remember how this works. I think he was like in pain a lot of time, if I'm remembering right. But this is like a cool thing. It's like he's taking an impact hit. And when we see this like just absolutely sunfire orange on top of this very translucent, smoky character, it does pop out then. It is a point of distinction. It's something that you can immediately look at and notice that, hey, there's maybe something a little more to this character than his very invisible self. Now, I don't mean to be nitpicky with this character, but if we look at the upper part of his visor, there is just a slight little area where that gray paint was not exactly cleanly put on. Normally that stuff is not too much of a big deal because you have other paint applications and other things to look at with your eyes. But when we have this mostly translucent figure, those small areas where paint is applied and it's not applied in the most precise way, it does stand out. What would be super interesting to do with this character is to start mixing and matching parts with the other Phantom Ranger. In fact, let's just do the most basic of that, and we'll pop the head here, and we will swap the parts, because I think that would be a lot of fun to do. So here we have the head swap, and this is kind of cool, because to me this is like a transitionary effect for the character. So if he were to start activating his invisible mode, you know, it might start at the helmet, and then it would like spread to other parts of your body. So if you have the original Phantom Ranger, and then you have the invisible mode Phantom Ranger, you could then start to swap parts in and out to show how he's phasing in and out of reality or visibility, whatever you want to say. And then vice versa, you have a mostly translucent character with then the helmet phasing back into visible light, which is a really cool thing. It's something that if you only have both of these figures, you can start to assemble and kind of kit bash in a official capacity, if that makes any sense. But does the invisible Phantom Ranger work? Well, I think it works in terms of augmenting the offerings when Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Lightning Collection existed. It's a really cool way of not only having a really cool translucent figure, it's something that I personally like, but it also gives you like an in-universe additional character or additional mode to that character. But it's also like a smart way if we're thinking about toy making as like a business, to not only offer another version of a character, but one that exists in universe that is special. And ultimately, this is the same figure as the normal Phantom Ranger. He's just the invisible version. And if you like that translucency, if you like having something very challenging to look at if you're sitting him on the shelf, something that you have to pick up and inspect closely, well, then this is a cool figure. But if I had to compare them and put them side by side, the original version is clearly the definitive one. This is just a fun fan offering, I would say. Something that really works for fans of Power Rangers Turbo. I think the normal Phantom Ranger works a little more than the invisible one, because to me it feels like if you have the original and have the invisible one, well, then they both play off each other very well. But if you only have the invisible one, maybe you have a really cool collection of translucent figures, but something gets lost if you don't have the companion figure to go along, to show the transition, to show that they are the same character, but just in different formats. Again, in a way that the universe of Power Rangers Turbo explains really well. So I guess if I had to distill everything down to a very succinct way. I like the idea of the Invisible Phantom Ranger more than how he came out. I think it was done well. I think it was done in the correct way. It feels like a character that you need to have the original to complement and play off one another. And if you enjoyed our discussion about the Invisible Phantom Ranger, well, I talk a lot about action figures, pop culture, collectibles, blasters, anything action related. So I'd love it if you could stay tuned to the Ri-Fi channel, and the way to do that is hit the subscribe button. Well, that's all I know about the Invisible Phantom Ranger. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.